the World Organic News podcast for the week ending 16th of January 2017. Jon Moore reporting. Compost. Yes, for our listeners in the snowy, frozen parts of the Northern Hemisphere, now is the time to be composting. Spring is on its way, even if it doesn't feel like it. This week has seen quite a few posts on the gentle art of composting. From the blog Zero Waste McMinnville comes the post Composting 101. An interesting background story where the author was introduced to recycling is worth the read in itself. But it's all about the composting this week, so the author has moved on from a plastic bucket. Quote, "Our plastic container on the kitchen counter has recently been replaced by a designed compost bin. It has a filter and is easy to clean. With the lid kept in place, there is no odour, nor any enticement for fruit flies to gather." End quote. Composting is about coming to terms with the flows of nature. Smells and fruit flies can be part of the deal. To keep ourselves healthy, we must take measures like tight-fitting lids and filters or removal of the material from the house as quickly as possible. We are dealing with a living thing, or more accurately, a number of living things with compost. The interconnectedness of these lives is what makes or breaks your compost. Composting is an aerobic process, that is, it occurs in the presence of oxygen. Anaerobic decomposition, without any oxygen obviously, is used to produce biogas, but that is a whole other story. Funnily enough, the blog Rustic Edibles also has a post entitled Composting 101. Rustic Edibles describes their method. Quote, "We maintain a compost pile with vegetable and fruit scraps, egg and seafood shells, coffee and tea grounds, leaves, grass cuttings, and cow manure. It's also good to alternate layers of brown and green material in order to keep the pile healthy. And of course, turning the pile is good for aeration, although a compost pile on the ground does permit aeration from worms and other healthy organisms." End quote. Now, there is much debate amongst composters, and I have tried both methods, turning the pile and leaving it. I can't see much difference in time or outcome, but you can conduct your own experiments. For me, it's a bit academic, as I prefer to use a different method again, vermiculture. That is, the use of compost worms. I find the output from the worms a better matrix in which to plant, but that's just me. And the blog micelasite site with their post, The Use of the Vermiculture, to give a succinct but powerful explanation of the process and its benefits. Quote, "This method is simple, effective, convenient and noiseless. Saves water, energy, landfill, and helps rebuild the soil. The worm's ability to convert organic waste into nutrient-rich material reduces the need for synthetic fertilizers. We violate nature's ability to complete the life cycle process when we send food down the garbage disposal or bury it in landfill. We deplete the soil and deprive nature from rehabilitating itself when we bypass this natural life cycle recycling process." End quote. Well put. Closing cycles is merely a matter of remembering the words of the late Bill Mollison. Waste is simply a resource in the wrong place. And landfills and garbage disposals are probably the two greatest wrong places we deposit resources. In summary, the post nails the advantages of vermiculture. Open brackets. As an aside, this post was written by someone for whom English was not a first language. I will quote them verbatim, because I think the meaning still comes across. Close brackets. Quote, "The vermiculture has every more future day, since it helps the man to recycle the remains of most of the organic matters that it produces, both of animal and domestic origin, avoiding the contamination and simultaneously helping him in the systems of agriculture, forest production and of gardening, putting at its disposal a product completely ecological and recognised like ideal for the food of any class of plants and germination of seeds." End quote. But wait, there's more. Compost and vermiculture may also be used as the basis of a tea. Brewing Compost Tea by Dank47 covers the first and probably only mistake you can make with compost tea, anaerobic digestion. Bubbling air through the water from an aquarium pump, and the compost tea will ensure wild bacterial growth and wonder fertilizer. And it really is good stuff. So whether you turn your compost pile or don't, whether you let compost worms do the decomposition for you or not, Whether you make tea or not, pick at least one method and do that. A quote from the site Journey to Forever will inspire. Quote, "It is estimated that a human with a compost fork and a watering can, carefully piling up organic matter with the correct carbon-nitrogen ratio, water content and aeration, so that it cooks away at high temperatures and emits jets of steam, will make as much topsoil in a year as nature can make in a century, and nature definitely approves." End quote. Just let that sink in for a little while. And that brings us to the end of this week's podcast. If you've liked what you've heard, could you please follow the link in the show notes and vote for World Organic News in the Australian Podcast Awards? Thanks in advance. Any suggestions, feedback or criticism of the podcast or blog are most welcome. Email me at podcast@worldorganicnews.com, again in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week.